Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark. We're in Ruth chapter 1. We'll be looking at verse 2 this lesson. But before we begin, Jeremiah 15:16. Thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me the joy and the rejoicing of my heart. Now, it says here in verse 2, and the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his two sons were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they came into the country of Moab and continued there. Now, Elimelech, his name means God is my king. Naomi, her name means pleasant. Now, the two sons, Mahlon means sickly or sickness, and Chilion means pining or consumption. Now, they were probably, the two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, were probably named this because they were in some way weak or sickly children, not really expected to live long on the earth, but they did live long enough to get married. So there had to be some kind of reason why Elimelech and Naomi named them, sickly and pining. But they did, and it proved out true. They lived long enough to get married, and then they died. And it says here that they were Ephrathites, all right? And it means Ephrathites is an ancient name of Bethlehem in the land of Judah. You can look that up in Genesis chapter 35, verses 16 and 19, and also Genesis 48 and verse 7. So Ephrathites is the ancient name for Bethlehem in the land of Judah. Now, and it says here also, they came into the country of Moab, and it says, and they continued there. Now, back in verse 1, it says, they went to sojourn. They went to do what? They went to sojourn in the land of Moab. Now, in verse 2, it says they came into the country of Moab and they continued there. Continued. Now, the Hebrew word for continued means to remain, to be or to be something or to become something. It implies that they settled down. And as I said in verse 1, they really only intended to sojourn. But now in verse 2, they've settled down. They may not have had any intention of returning ever to the land of Israel, back to Bethlehem. They must have got some kind of a permanent job and a permanent home. Maybe they were Bedouins. Maybe they lived in tents their whole, for these 10 years. Maybe they got permanent home. We don't know, but it kind of implies, this word continued kind of implies that, at least in their mind, they had settled down in the land of Moab. Now, more than 100 years before Ruth was even born, God pronounced judgment on Moab by the prophet Balaam. If we turn back to Numbers chapter 24 and verse 17, it says, I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab, and destroy all the children of Sheth. In the days of adversity, consider. Adversity, difficult times in our life, They will either drive a Christian closer to God or closer to this world. Those who go closer to the world for help instead of to God will be like Naomi. They will return to God as a weeping widow, empty of everything. Or they will return like the prodigal son, repenting in shame and wearing rags. And that's so true. God brings, as we said last lesson, God brings tests and trials in our life. And some people respond, some Christians respond positively. They stay in under the trial. And there's a blessing in under the trial. Their faith is strengthened. Their relationship to God is tremendous. But sometimes trials that God brings in our life, tests, Christians want to get out from underneath them. And they go into this world. They go into Moab. And they go into these false gods. And what happens is then years later, God touches their heart and they want to return to God. But when they do, it's with shame. Or they come back and they say, like Naomi did, I'm Mara. I'm bitterness. It's bitterness. God has dealt bitterly with me. Well, no, God didn't. We're going to deal with that in a few lessons here. But God didn't deal bitterly with Naomi. And some Christians, that's what happens is they, instead of staying in under the trial, they slip out from underneath the pressures of God's test and they go into the world, back into the world, the old life. And that's a tremendous failure on their life, and at their life. Then in verse 3, and Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left, and her 2 sons. Elimelech dies, and God begins to strip Naomi of her earthly provisions. Death must come to all, and death is not partial. Death doesn't care how much money you have or what your name is. Death comes to all. Even as the rich man in Luke chapter 16, having an abundant supply of earthly goods cannot prevent death. People may die in the very place where they think that they have plenty to preserve life. And that's the fallacy of it. That's the facade that is put in front, is that go to Moab. There's plenty of food. Yeah, it's away from God. Yeah, there's no fellowship with God, but there's plenty there. Oh, I'll go to Moab. Not even thinking, not even considering that you're going to die there. And so many, they enter into the very place where they think that they have tremendous provisions for life, and yet that's where they die. The abundance of earthly comforts is not evidence of being strong spiritually, and it does not keep us from death. And this is a tremendous deception upon Christianity, is that we see preachers on TV or on the radio, or we find out that this preacher's got 2 Rolls Royces and 5,000 people coming to their church, and we think that this is success. We think that because they have the Rolls Royces or the Mercedes Benzes, because they have the jewels on there, that they are close to God, that that somehow God is blessing them because they're spiritually strong. And look, at riches and prestige in this life has nothing to do with a person's spiritual relationship with God. They could be starving. They could be starving spiritually. They could be tremendously way off base. even though they have these things. And yet Christianity gets deceived because they see preachers and teachers having lots of things in this world. And they assume that, well, because of that, they must be strong in God. They must have some kind of special relationship with God, and I'll never get to that point, right? and they could be tremendously way off base in their relationship with God. It's generally believed that Elimelech died shortly after arriving in Moab. So here's Elimelech wanting to go to Moab. Again, what I forgot to mention last lesson is that if Elimelech and Naomi and their two sons did pass by Jordan, if they went that way to get to Moab, if they passed through Jordan and crossed the Jordan River, and I'm sorry, not Jordan, they passed through Jericho. If they did go past the city of Jericho and across the Jordan River, they would have to enter into the land of Reuben's land. And if we don't know for sure, but maybe Reuben's land wasn't under this drought. I'm sorry, this famine. Maybe Reuben's land had food. And if they did, why didn't they settle there? Why wouldn't they settle among their own people? If Reuben's land wasn't under the famine, why didn't they settle there? Why did they go to Moab? So again, why did they go to a heathen land, a land that worships Chemosh and sacrifices live children in the fire? So, but anyways, they do go to Moab, and I'm sure Elimelech went with high spirits of, now we're here. There's plenty of food. We'll start getting work. We'll pitch our tents and we'll start living here and we'll have plenty of food. And little did he know, his time was up. He wasn't there very long. We don't know. A few weeks, maybe a couple months, and he's gone. He's gone. And he had no idea that would ever happen, but it does. And sometimes that's how God deals with us. We think we're going to escape the tests and trials of God and go into this world system, and we're going to just live there for a while in the old world system. And death happens quickly. Death happens quickly. People dying at their 40s and 50s, Christians dying early because they went out from underneath the trial back into the world, thinking, I'll just stay here for a while until the trial is over. Once the trial is over, then I'll go back to God. Well, they had no intention of ever dying in the unpromised land, but they did. Until next lesson, walk with the Lord. I know He walks with you.